This Memorial Day, Bob Morris is a man with a monument-sized weight lifted off his shoulders.
Finally, after all these years.
Flashback to March 2017.
Here is my medication drawer.
And we were sharing the Avon, Minnesota veteran's story about his more than a decade-long battle with the VA over benefits for serious health problems he strongly suspected were caused by exposure in Korea to the toxic herbicide Agent Orange.
Digging into the dirt where the Agent Orange was being sprayed.
The VA's website says veterans who served in Korea near the Demilitarized Zone, or DMZ, between 1968 and 1971 are presumed to have been exposed. But every time Bob tried to get benefits,
nothing but denials.
The government lost Bob's military records in a fire. But he had other proof he'd been at the DMZ. Letters from other men in his unit, and even a recording he'd mailed from Korea to his parents in St. Cloud.
I was at combat preparedness school.
Telling them about his time at the DMZ.
I fired all these things when we were at the DMZ.
I was on the DMZ.
Determined to fight his denials, Bob repeatedly tried calling the Board of Veterans Appeals in D.C. to find out his hearing date. But to add insult to injury, kept getting transferred to one number that was disconnected.
To connect to Laurel Locksmith.
And another.
The phone's ringing.
That rang repeatedly without being answered. Carol Evans' investigation, profiling Bob's story of disconnects and denials, made waves all the way to the nation's capital.
Because this was just an outrage.
Senator Amy Klobuchar and Congressman Tim Walz both got involved.
If Bob's appeal would have been heard in a timely manner, he wouldn't be needing to make this call.
Congressman Walz introduced legislation to cut red tape and help break the VA's benefit claims backlog. President Trump recently signed that bill into law. Also because of Bob's story, an antiquated VA call center was shut down. As for Bob himself, Senator Klobuchar helped him finally get that appeals hearing he'd been waiting for.
And he had such a strong case for a disability based on his service, and yet he had to wait for years and years.
After waiting months more for a ruling,
got the letter right here.
Bob just received his answer in the mail.
Well, this is my order that my service connection for Agent Orange was granted.
Bob will now begin receiving benefits for his heart disease and diabetes, which are two of the presumptive side effects of Agent Orange exposure.
When we think of CTE brain disease, we think football. Those hits on the field, players suing over the issue, and the popular movie Concussion bringing it all to light. But there are men and women in different uniforms facing the same problem.
We're talking about our servicemen and women, and now one military mom is speaking out to investigative reporter AJ Legault about what can be a hidden trauma for our soldiers.
Ready. Hey. Fort Snelling National Cemetery, a place with no shortage of stories.
On behalf of the President, it is with honor I present you this flag as a symbol of the great republic.
His life was really just beginning. Makes my heart race every time I come here.
But the story of just what caused Kevin Ash to end up here 10 days shy of his 35th birthday.
And he died on January 15th, 2017.
Was for even his mother Joy a mystery.
I always tell him I love him, and I'm so sorry that I didn't know.
A gunner often tasked with convoy duty, Sergeant Ash's records show he was within 30 yards of 12 IED blasts, but managed to make it through 3 tours of duty without a scratch. But all was not right.
He changed. He changed a lot.
Once sensitive and thoughtful,
he was very explosive. His temper was outrageous, and his behavior was bad.
The VA diagnosed Kevin with the usual suspects: PTSD, anxiety, depression, but denied he had a traumatic brain injury.
Nope, they never would diagnose that.
Then in the fall of 2013, while playing rugby, Kevin collapsed after a routine tackle and fell into a coma for a month. Over the next 3 years, he was unable to care for himself, battling cognitive dysfunction, memory loss, even blindness.
And ultimately, he passed away in hospice care at the Minneapolis VA.
Joy wanted answers that doctors couldn't seem to give. So, acting on a hunch, she donated Kevin's brain to Boston University, the same center that's research has documented serious brain injury and disease in football players subjected to years of big hits. BU called Joy with their findings.
And at the end I said, so did he have CTE or not? And she said, oh yeah, he had CTE.
That evidence of CTE, chronic traumatic encephalopathy caused by substantial blast-related brain injuries, is significant. Dr. Lee Goldstein is director of BU's neurotrauma laboratory.
The numbers of these military servicemen and women who've had these exposures are staggeringly large. I mean, this is not a small problem.
He says one blast exposure causes numerous brain injuries and fears the risks may be even higher if repeated blasts come close together.
You know, if you have one of those where you really have multiple injuries all at once, and you have another one, you know, a week or two later, not good. Not good. Not good at all.
Dr. Goldstein says just like football needing to limit blows to players' heads, Kevin's case clearly shows the military needs to better track and limit a soldier's repeated exposure to blasts, even if it means pulling a healthy-looking soldier out of the field.
What does Sergeant Ash's case mean for the rest of the veteran community?
This case in particular is bringing to light is this is real, it has real consequences, and we need to take this issue very seriously because otherwise people get worse and they die.
It's that knowledge that Kevin's final act of service could provide information that saves other soldiers that has his mom vowing to tell his story to all who listen.
He always was the one to lead the way, so he has one more chance to do that.
Joy tells us her goal is to help her son's legacy of service live on through the search for earlier diagnosis and treatments of CTE. She's partnered with the Concussion Legacy Foundation to raise awareness and to encourage other military members to pledge their brain to accelerate military CTE research. We've put links on how you can learn more about that on KARE11.com, Julie.
Man, our hearts certainly go out to her. And you can't definitively say it is CTE until the person has passed away. Are there ways to maybe track it and say this definitely looks like CTE?
They are starting to be able to do some earlier diagnosis saying this really looks like CTE, but that official diagnosis right now is still postmortem.
All right. Thanks so much, AJ. New at 6, there is a blistering new report about life-threatening problems in the VA's organ transplant program.
In a letter sent directly to President Trump, the U.S. Office of Special Counsel, the government agency that investigates whistleblower complaints, accuses the VA of failing to address issues revealed more than a year and a half ago in a KARE 11 investigation. AJ Legault has the latest in an investigation we call Distance, Delays, and Denial.
How many patients do you think unnecessarily died because of this system?
Thousands.
His name is Jamie McBride, a whistleblower who in 2016 told us veterans needing transplants were dying needlessly because of restrictive VA rules. Minnesota veterans like John Moore, who died waiting for a liver transplant.
And he didn't get it.
Moore's widow says instead of letting him get the transplant at a private hospital here, VA rules required him to travel all the way to a VA transplant facility in Texas.
And what we found on a national level was that VA patients had less transplant over time compared to patients with either private insurance or Medicare insurance.
Medical researchers both at the Cleveland Clinic and at the University of Pennsylvania found veterans who rely on the VA for transplants are less likely to get them and more likely to die waiting than private insurance patients.
So the distance itself appeared to be potentially a big barrier for transplantation.
Now this report, sent directly to the president, found numerous shortcomings and unanswered questions in the VA's response to the problems VA whistleblower Jamie McBride detailed. It praised McBride for bringing forward the numerous barriers to life-saving organ transplants for veterans and faults the VA's response, saying it did not acknowledge the potential harm to veterans caused by delays and denials.
All in the interest of the best care for our veterans.
The U.S. House has already passed a bill to let veterans have transplants locally at private hospitals, but it still needs approval in the Senate. For KARE 11 Investigates, I'm A.J. Legault.
In response to the letter to the president, the VA sent KARE 11 a statement that says, in part, we feel OSC's assessment is ill-informed due to a lack of understanding of the general standards and practices regarding organ transplants throughout the U.S. medical community. That statement from the VA's deputy press secretary. You can read the VA's response in detail on KARE11.com.